to those people who may be watching or are watching our recorded version, I'm David Lytle with the Eastmoreland Neighborhood Association. They are the sponsor of this Zoom panel. We're a 21-member elected board on staggered terms. And we advocated for this back in 2016. In full disclosure, we're still advocating for it today. We're having this Zoom panel because we want people to be able to make an informed decision. We're going to talk a lot about the facts, how this would impact you as a homeowner in Eastmoreland, what it would do, what it would not do. And that's the big purpose of this. I don't want to get into long political discussions or anything like that, but the pot is coming to a boil here for residents of Eastmoreland because the nomination is being submitted again to the National Park Service. That'll happen next month, I understand. And then after that, the National Park Service has 45 days to review it. And we're expecting them to pass it unless a majority of homeowners object to it. And if you do object to it or you favor it, we just want to make sure you have all the facts at your fingertips and we answer all the questions you might have about it so you can make that informed decision. People who are watching, there is a Q&A and we've already got a question here. So feel free to put those questions in there. We're going to try to get to as many as we can. We have a lot that we already have from people who have asked us these questions. But again, what we want to do is make sure people know the facts to make that informed decision making. So we've got a great panel here tonight. I want to go around briefly and let each one of them introduce themselves and talk about their area of expertise and what kind of questions perhaps they look forward to answering. Let's start off with John in the upper right-hand corner of my screen.
That would be me, I guess. Hi, everybody. I'm John Liu. I'm actually a resident of Laurelhurst, not of Eastmoreland. And I think I'm here because I led the Laurelhurst historic nomination effort, which was successful and completed in 2019. And after that, I worked with the Laurelhurst Neighborhood Association, helping out contractors and homeowners who wanted to know what this meant for them. And so I answered a bunch of those questions. And I do some other things relating to historic preservation, but that's the main part.
Okay, thanks, John. We'll go down to Rod Merrick next. Rod?
Hi, I'm Rod Merrick, and I am currently the land use co-chair for Eastmoreland Neighborhood Association, past president, and lead on the historic district for Eastmoreland, along with our many volunteers and team members and consultants. And I'm also an architect and involved in other areas of historic preservation as well.
Okay, going down, Kirk next.
Hi, my name is Kirk Ranzetta. I'm a senior architectural historian, but I'm actually volunteering here today to hopefully answer some questions. I was part of a team that drafted the National Register nomination for the Eastmoreland Neighborhood Association, and I've prepared several other large historic district nominations in the state of Oregon, including the Irvington National Register nomination, then also the Oak Hills nomination, which is located up in Beaverton.
Wow, great to have you here. Thanks for coming. Moving on to Ian Johnson. Ian?
Hi, my name is Ian Johnson. I'm the Associate Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer for the state of Oregon, which puts me in charge of all the programs authorized under the National Historic Preservation Act, which includes the National Register of Historic Places, this topic here. And prior to that, I was the National Register Program Coordinator for the state, which is the job that Robert Olguin currently holds.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to Hillary Adam. Hillary?
Hi. Hillary Adams, Senior Planner at the Bureau of Development Services on the Design and Historic Review Team. I am the liaison to the Historic Landmarks Commission.
Thanks. And last but not least, Robert, and I think you might be on mute, Robert. So tell us about yourself.
Hi, Robert Olguin. I'm with the State Historic Preservation Office. I work under Ian and I coordinate the National Register of Historic Places program.
Wow, great. We're really lucky to have everyone here tonight. I can't thank you enough because we do want to help people make some really good decisions about this. We've already had a couple of questions come in. We'll get to those eventually. A lot of them were about rescissions and how to file that. That's a simple thing to do, and it's also on our website, but we'll get back and contact you personally about how to do that. Very simple procedure. But first, I want to get right down to the brass tacks about the historic district. You know, it's been long coming. Well, it hasn't come yet. Very controversial. But one of the biggest objections we get to this over and over again is that it would stop me from remodeling my house. In fact, the major website against it to this day still says, you know, the primary objection we have to it is it would make remodeling our houses extremely expensive or perhaps not at all possible. And I wanted to get what the actual state of affairs is with that. And Hillary, I think you're the one to answer that. How would a historic district in Eastmoreland affect people's right to remodel their house?
Yeah, I can take this one for the from the city perspective in terms of what regulations are applicable, and they would be similar to the regulations that are now applicable in Laurelhurst. Essentially, if you have a contributing resource or non-contributing resource in the historic district, that's what I'm going to be speaking to. I'm not going to be speaking to individual landmarks, whether locally listed or listed on the National Register, because I just want to speak to the district listing. But generally, historic resource review is exempt in districts that are listed in the National Register and not locally listed. So this district, if it's just listed on the National Register and the city doesn't initiate, or the neighborhood doesn't initiate a local listing as well, it would be known as a National Register district per our city code, which was just updated March 1st. As part of that update, we also finally included a definition, so to speak, for demolition, which we did not have before, which I think led to a lot of confusion.
Definitely, and we'll cover that extensively. I just
wanted to touch real quick that, you know, there are thresholds for demolition, and that it's not as simple as a total clearing of the property. So definitely, if somebody took on a major remodel, they might trigger this demolition threshold, which would trigger demolition review. Or
I first want to go back to the first half of your answer, just to make sure people understand. You said the National Register District, which is proposed for Eastmoreland, if that comes to reality, we would be exempt from any kind of architectural review for remodels.
It depends on the extent of the remodel.
Well, I'll give you the examples that people throw at us. They wouldn't be able to add a dormer to their roof, solar panels to their roof. They wouldn't be able to remodel their front porch. No. They'd be able to do all that.
Stuff like that would be exempt.
So I don't have to worry about like the color of my house is somebody's going to come down on me, or I put aluminum siding up. They're going to come after me.
Right.
Okay. I just want to be sure.
Yeah, you know, I'm looking at the code. I'm looking at the code as I'm answering your question, and it speaks to removal of street-facing walls. So, you know, applying new siding on top of it, on top of the existing, the way our code is written, that wouldn't qualify as demolition review. And we don't have a historic resource review for that. So, yeah.
So unless you cross that threshold into demolition, there is no historic review of your remodeling projects.
Correct.
That's correct. Oh, good. John, let's get your perspective, because Laurelhurst has been under this for a couple of years now. Has that been the case for you guys?
Yes, so Laurelhurst became a National Register Historic District in, I think it was June 2019. And I'm pretty familiar with the, kind of questions people have because I was the person answering them in our neighborhood. I probably answered in the first 6 months about 10 to 15 inquiries from contractors and architects and homeowners and realtors and so forth. So here is what we have observed in Laurelhurst, and I'm confident this conforms to the code as well. As a practical matter, almost anything that you think of as a homeowner as remodeling, okay, is not going to require any special historic review. You will have to comply with the city's normal building permits and normal building code and all that stuff, right? You don't get a pass on that. But basically, new windows, adding dormers, bigger porch,
That's good because we just got a question here about windows. What about windows? And you're saying they're exempt.
Yeah, there's no review, no historic review required for any of that stuff. What we've seen in Laurelhurst is the only, as a practical matter, restriction that people have had, well, I'm going to call this theoretical actually, is if you actually want to demolish your house, then you're going to have to go through review. I'm calling this theoretical because I've never actually had a homeowner come to me and say, hey, I want to demolish my house. Can I do it? But I mean, if you did, then you would want to look at the definition of demolition, which, there's some nuances, but really it's not anything that, we normally think of as remodeling. It's not going to be a demolition.
Maybe I can get back to, thank you, John, to Hillary on that, because you were going to go that way before I kind of cut you off, and sorry about that. Could you go over the nuances of demolition? John is saying and most remodels that a typical homeowner does would not trigger this demolition review. What exactly would trigger this demolition review?
Yeah, I'm just going to read straight from the code. Total demolition, obviously. Second, an alteration that requires a demolition permit, except if you need a demolition permit to relocate the structure. An alteration that results in the removal of 50% or more of any street facing wall of a structure. One of the questions talk about demolishing and rebuilding a front wall. If you take down more than 50% of that, or 50% or more, then that would trigger a demolition review. An alteration that removes 50% or more of the total exterior wall area of a structure, and the removal of 50% or more of the total roof area of a structure. And then for structures that aren't buildings, an alteration that results in the removal of 50% or more. So, this isn't perfect. We're trying to get at the state definition of demolition, which means the actions that you take result in a loss of the historic character. And that's a very subjective thing. And our code has to be black and white. And so this is what we arrived at after hours and hours and hours of conversation. If you are doing one of these things that isn't a total demolition, there is a bypass where you don't have to go through demolition review, but you can get approval for those changes through a historic resource review. So it's sort of an optional historic resource review to get the blessing to do those changes without going through a demolition review.
Okay, I see, and it does. I see why you're talking about that black and white that you have to have, and a lot of homeowners have more subjective questions. Like here's one that comes in, and maybe Rod or one of our other panelists would like to look at this. They say, if I take my English tutor and refashion it to a modern style, would that require approval? Parentheses, it seems it would involve demolition. Now, I know that's very subjective, but Rod is an architect as well. Maybe you can tackle that, or someone else on the panel?
Sure. I think it's pretty clear that if you were going to transform the house from a Tudor, the front of the house, and that involved removing are destroying 50% of the front-facing facade, which it sounds like you would do, then you would be in the category of demolishing, and you would need a review. And that also assumes that your house has not been previously significantly changed so that it actually is a contributing structure.
Right, okay. John, could you elaborate a little bit more? I know because we keep getting these questions about demolition in here. You said in Laurelhurst, has that ever come up that people demolish so much of their house they would need a historical review?
It has never come up. There is a non-contributing house that's actually on my block where they virtually took it down and rebuilt it, and it's now roughly twice the size. So had that been a contributing house, that would, I think, almost certainly have triggered a review. But other than that, no. Because all the stuff that normally people do is exempt. You want to replace your windows, repaint, re-side your house, re-roof your house, make your porch bigger, add windows, add doors, add an ADU, all that's exempt. So it's at least in Laurelhurst, we really haven't had any issues of the nature you're talking about.
Okay, that's good insight to have there. One thing I also wanted to touch on before we jump to some other questions is people still have this impression, they think of Irvington and Ladd's Addition about, well, those people in those neighborhoods have to go through historical review for those historic districts, but Eastmoreland and Laurelhurst don't. What changed? Can someone help me on that?
I'm happy to.
Please.
So basically, state law changed such that national registered districts established after, you can help me out with this, Ian, but it's February 2017 was the cutoff date.
Yep.
Are now what we call only national registered districts. In other words, they have this very light regulation that we've been talking about in Laurelhurst and Eastmoreland. So Irvington became a national registered district, obviously, in I think 2010, so before that date. So they're kind of a full-blown historic district with all the review and, approval of, new windows and that kind of stuff. But, anybody who becomes a national registered district after that February 2017 doesn't have to deal with that. And, we got that treatment in Laurelhurst, and as far as I know, Eastmoreland would as well.
And Hillary is nodding her head, and I see Ian is nodding their head. So all the panelists agree with that answer. Okay.
Yeah, David, I think one thing to elaborate on that is that when the city adopted its recent historic code in March, it created a new set of categories. This is in addition to what the state did in 2017. But the city created a series of categories so that anything that was previously a national historic district, as well as anything that the city will adopt in the future, which is right now, there's nothing on the table as far as I know, would be given the historic design review standards. And then down the line are a category of districts called conservation districts, which is not Eastmoreland. And then down the line from that is the National Register. So the National Register sort of been given the least protections, but these protections stem from the state law, which requires the cities adopt demolition protections. And Ian can confirm that as well, if you want to add to that, Ian.
Sure. I mean, what we're talking about is what's called the Goal 5 rule, which is a rule managed by the Department of Land Conservation and Development, which puts out general rules on behalf of the state of Oregon under the rulemaking process for land use processes. And one of those is historic properties. And so that was revised and adopted in February 2017. And there is a sharp dividing line on how National Register properties are addressed at that point. And if you were to go look up that rule, you would find on one of the subsections, it talks about demolition, and relocation is the other thing that it talks about. So picking up a building and moving it, there is a requirement there. And Hillary is correct that the definition is squishy in that rule, and it intentionally so, allowing cities to define that a little more sharply as they so choose. As she pointed out, for land use processes, cities often need to do that to fit their code.
This is all very good information. I hope opens up some people's eyes. Although I did just get a question here addressed to Hillary coming up, and it was about solar panels. And they say, could you ask Hillary, isn't in some circumstances there would be a review of solar panels on a house?
I'd say only potentially if your property is a landmark. So if your property is not a landmark, then have at it.
Okay, and none of these houses that would be under a historic district are considered landmarks.
Yeah, I think the only landmark building, in my impression, is the Dunaway School. So for if Dunaway wanted to put solar panels on the roof, they would have to go through a review.
Okay, but that's the only one that you can think of.
Yeah, I don't think anything else. Kirk might add to that or just confirm that, because he studied this in depth, or his team studied in depth.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I mean, the landmarks, do they include previously listed National Register properties, just like individual properties? I'm trying to remember if Eastmoreland had any.
Yeah.
If there was like 2 or 3. There were not very many.
Yeah, I just see a couple on Portland maps in the gallery. There's
Yeah.
a historic
So-
resources map.
So you would only need to go through some level of design review for properties that have been previously listed on the National Register and that the city essentially calls landmarks.
Okay, that's good to know. That's good to know. And I do want to get into demolitions and ADUs and rescissions and other things, but questions still keep popping up here, and they're good questions about remodeling projects. And I know we can't spend all night on these, but I think this is a typical one where we might get into a squishy area. So I'm going to throw this out to the panelists, and maybe we can all have some kind of final word. A gentleman named Ron says he's a 40-year resident and homeowner on Southeast 30th. My front-facing picture window has some dry rot issues, and he wants to repair or replace this, and he may have to replace the entire west-facing stucco wall. Now, he's worried if there were issues he would run into with historical review of that. And I know we don't have all the specifics, but I'd love to hear just people's thinking about that. Who can I? Okay, thank you, Hillary.
Yeah, I think what you would do is you would submit a permit to repair or replace that stucco, and assuming that you were going to replace that stucco with stucco, you know, I don't think that would cause any pauses with us at most. The permit reviewer would maybe check in with me or somebody on my team to confirm that it doesn't meet that threshold of demolition. And I don't believe that it would, because unless you're talking about taking down the framing as well, it's just the skin of that wall that we're talking about. So I don't think that would meet the threshold for demolition.
Right, okay.
Ian, would you disagree? Or Robert?
Well, that's on the city there. I mean, you know, so it's,
Yeah, that's a city call.
yeah, I can tell you that with cities struggling with or working through that demolition definition, it's coming out a little bit different city to city, but that's, you know, that was the intentional wiggle room, you know, provided in that statement, because I was staff to that rule advisory committee, and it was determined that it was best to leave some wiggle room there because the reality was different maybe for Portland than it might be for another community. So, but yeah, it's however the individual jurisdiction chooses to define it is what they can do.
And the one more thing I would add is that it's the operating assumption that the stucco is original to the house, or that it was done during the period of significance for the district. And if it wasn't, then I think there would be that much more leeway to kind of, rectify the wall situation with the house.
Well, my take would be similar to Hillary's in that if there wasn't actually a structural change to the wall, in other words, if the framing wasn't taken down and rebuilt and modified into a contemporary, as one of the questioners suggested, that wouldn't qualify as a demolition. That would qualify as a repair, remodel. The window itself, obviously, it would be wonderful if the homeowner put in a window that was compatible with what's there. But again, that is not a requirement of the historic review. So that's up to the homeowner's good judgment.
That helps, and I think the perspective from Laurelhurst that John provided us earlier really helps too. People might be overthinking this, but you've got that 50% threshold, and that seems pretty substantial, and I think it was written to be substantial like that. One other thing I want to touch on demolitions here. This has come up a lot about garages. People ask, I have a detached garage in my house. There's a lot in Eastmoreland. A lot of them were never built that well to begin with, and they kind of teeter and totter. Can I demolish my detached garage? Hillary?
Yeah, demolition of detached accessory structures in commercial and residential zones. If they're 800 square feet or less, that's exempt from demolition review.
Wow, no demolition review for 800 feet or less.
Yeah.
800 square feet, which would be a very substantial garage, yeah.
Yeah, and that's applicable to contributing resources. So non-contributing resource, of course, exempt from demolition as well.
Oh, right. And what if it's not a detached garage, but say it's just, a small one-car garage attached to your house? People have those, and often they're in bad condition. Could you demolish that?
If it doesn't meet that threshold for demolition review, then yeah.
Oh, the 50, if it doesn't meet that
Yeah.
50%, you'd be free to do that. Great. This is good information. Thank you, guys. Hey, I want to move to something more positive than demolition. How about new construction? As I think one of the panelists here brought up an ADU, like say I want to put an ADU on my property. I have an historic property, which is called a contributing resource. People have been asking that in the chat window here too. A contributing resource in Eastmoreland is one of those houses that was judged to be significant historically, which is about 80% of the houses. Ones built, I believe, after 1960 were left out of that, and some houses have been so modified over the years that they were also left out. But say I do have that contributing property, it's a nice historical home, I want to put an ADU there. Does that ADU, is that subject to any historical review?
No.
Not at all. Wow. Okay, that's good to know. And another question has come up too. One person put on social media, they were so lucky to move into Eastmoreland because someone had split off a bit of their property, their large lot, so they could build a smaller, more affordable home. And I'm guessing that is still allowable today. People could split their lot and build a small home. And that would not have to go through any kind of special historical review. Is that correct, Hillary?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I think that will allay a lot of fears about ADUs that people have. Let's see here. Okay, I'm just kind of going through my list here. Many questions are coming in. Thanks. I'm trying to get to them all, people, and I'll try to type an answer if I can't get to you, verbally here. And I think I'm answering most of these. Let's see. Some of them are so technical that we just can't get to here. This is an interesting one. What are the limitations on additions of square footage? Maybe we've answered that in kind of the building an ADU or something, but would there be any limits on putting an extension, a new a new room on your house because you're a contributing property?
No, only the base zone standards would apply in terms of floor area, building coverage setbacks, etc. So,
Okay, so nothing special, no new rules or restrictions on that. Okay, I want to move into another good question that came up here. And this is a big strategic question, maybe might be a very good one for Kurt to address, but it's, why is this important? Why preserving these houses and stopping their demolition? Why are we concerned about this?
That might be a better question for Rod. I think the Eastmoreland, I don't mean to shirk it, but I could give the philosophical speech in the shot in the
Well,
arm speech, but I think
I
it comes from the neighborhood.
I think that's what we want to start though, Kirk, is the philosophical side. And then I can pick up from there if you'd like. If you don't mind pulling.
Sure.
doing that.
I think, so historic preservation has been around for a very long time in this country, and it's evolved quite a bit, particularly over the last few decades. And I think there's a growing appreciation for the past, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So when you seek to identify and evaluate and then register resources, it's kind of an acknowledgement that the community is thinking that this neighborhood is historically significant, and it can be historically significant for a variety of reasons. In this particular case, I believe we listed it under the National Register criteria A and C, that the neighborhood essentially followed a lot of the underlying patterns of development, certainly in Portland as well as in Oregon during the early 20th century. And then also under C for its architectural significance, that it has quite a bit of diversity in terms of the architectural character of the neighborhood. And there's a lot of other, if you look through the nomination, there's a lot of other components to that nomination. And I really encourage folks to take a look at it and to kind of contemplate the rationale and the reasons why the Eastmoreland neighborhood is certainly eligible for the National Register and should be listed.
Ian, before I say anything, do you want to add to that from sort of the state perspective and why the state was supportive of what we have initiated?
Well, I would say our role is not to be supportive of any particular project. I mean, we do administer the National Register program, which I think is an important program in that it's designed to recognize the breadth and depth of the nation's history. And here in Oregon, what that looks like, it looks like neighborhoods like Eastmoreland. It looks like the Paul Bunyan statue in Kenton. It looks like the USS Blueback down there on the river. You know, there's a lot of very important aspects of history, and the goal of the State Historic Preservation Office is to capture that in its entirety across the state and within individual communities. I don't, from a, going to that philosophical point is you don't get the same feeling of a place from a book and a picture. There's something to be said for being able to walk up and see it and touch it, to be there in that place. It's not something that can be recreated. I could build something that looks all the same, but only that historic property was physically in contact with the past. I can't remake it. With that said, communities are living things and they move on. Buildings get altered, they get demolished, they fall down, they get flooded. So they are a finite resource and go apart in over time and attrition. So we work with a lot of different community partners, including neighborhoods, to find properties that meet that National Register criteria and go forward. It's not for everybody though. I mean, that's part of what we're having the discussion here. David talked about making sure people have the information. So while I'm a big advocate of preservation in general, we really look at this process to be driven by communities, and that's why there's a process to establish owner consent.
Yeah, and what I would add to what both of you have said is one of the things that's, some people don't see it this way from outside the neighborhood, but I think most of the people in the neighborhood understand this, and that is that Eastmoreland has a tremendous variety of housing sizes. and character from from the 20s, the 30s, and earlier. And it's really a very special place. And the only way to maintain that in the face of market forces is to provide historic preservation protection. And this is historic preservation protection light from my perspective. But the bottom line is, if you can't demolish it, there's a reasonable chance that it will be preserved. And that's our primary motivation, to maintain that variety in the neighborhood, and to fundamentally to guide change. We don't have much guidance force at this point, except for the demolition review, but that's the motivating forces. And John may have a similar perspective on Laurelhurst, but
I think in Laurelhurst, the reason we did it was certainly that. I mean, basically, look, these are both incredibly unique, lovely neighborhoods, and they're more than lovely. They're actually really important in sort of historically, architecturally, how Portland developed. And I think pretty much everybody in Laurelhurst thought and still thinks that it's necessary to preserve that. But there was something else going on too, which is during the years before our historic nomination, we were getting an accelerating rate of demolitions. And so basically, developers would come in and they just pick the smallest bungalow from a block and scrape it, and they'd build the biggest house on the block. And so, at that time they were buying bungalows for like $450, and the giant McMansion they were building was like 1.3 million. And we were looking at it like, wow, this goes on, there are going to be no more small bungalows left in Laurelhurst, which means there, no young families can come in there. And we didn't want to really become a monoculture of like great big expensive houses. And so there was that too. I mean, I think that was important to a lot of people.
yeah, that was very much a motivating. Eastmoreland had adopted a series of land use goals, and the preservation not only of the landscape and the streetscape, but the variety and the affordability was extremely important, because we could see the same thing that John was alluding to.
Any other comments on that subject? I can go back to some questions about from our panelists here. We've got a lot of questions about, if a previous owner owned my house, how do I overturn that objection, or how do I file a new objection? And I want to tell these people, definitely we'll get to that. Someone else, Dan here, raised a very good point that we're all sensitive to, and it'd be interesting who can answer this or wants to approach it. It's about the historical context of the district application. And it says it doesn't address the ways racial exclusion played a role in the neighborhood history and other similar neighborhoods. And does anyone have examples of ways to address the history of racial exclusion in the historical preservation process? John, you're raising your hand. What's up?
Yeah, let me talk about that, because we've kind of explicitly gone through that in Laurelhurst. So what we found was, to sort of confront the history of your neighborhood, good and bad, you first have to get people thinking about the history of the neighborhood, and you have to get people thinking about the neighborhood. So honestly, in Laurelhurst, I don't think there was any really impetus to address, the discriminatory zoning and all that stuff, and discriminatory deeds, until we became a historic district, because up until then, people hadn't really sat down and thought hard about the history of our neighborhood, both the good and the bad. Okay, so once we did become a historic district, then we had a real motivation and kind of base of knowledge to address that. We had done the research in the nomination. Our nomination has a fairly important section that explicitly talks about the deed restrictions, under which I, as a Chinese person, couldn't have owned a house in Laurelhurst back then. And then we did a bunch more research, and our neighborhood association board, with a lot of stakeholder input, actually adopted a fairly, I think, robust statement about what happened, why it happened, you know, what's bad about it. I mean, it's pretty damn obvious. And we published it, you know, in our newsletter. We published it on our website, and that has led to a bunch of DEI activities that are ongoing. So, you know, you celebrate the history of a place or a neighborhood, you have to recognize the bad part. The good comes with the bad. You have to take it as a whole package. And none of it can be swept under the rug.
And I think to add to that, it's really outside our Eastmoreland area, but isn't the city of Portland trying to recognize historical significance of certain landmark buildings in Portland because of the role they played in racial insensitivity or in advancing certain areas of the city that might have been overlooked? Am I correct on that? Would someone like to comment?
Yeah, so a really, really important thing happened last year, which is based on work that was done over, you know, many years by the Architectural Heritage Center. We got I think 94 buildings that are very important to African American history in Portland designated as, you know, historically significant. So now they're recognized. You know, you walk by that sort of nondescript storefront on MLK, and you can now go and find out, look, that is where, you know, like one of the most important Black newspapers was published, or that little house there was one of the most important Black doctors worked, you know, back when, like, you know, white doctors wouldn't treat Black people, things like that. So, and the city has just, I believe, funded an effort to do more of that history finding and recognition. So, I mean, I think we're at a pretty exciting time for historic preservation because we've been able to expand the definition of it. It's not just, oh, here's a beautiful Tudor. It's more like, here's something that's important for a variety of reasons. It can be social as well as architectural. It can be a famous person lived here, or famous movements was, you know, important here. So it's super exciting. I hope everybody gets involved in that.
So I can add to that just a little bit because I just wrote an advocacy letter along with John on the subject. And that is the city's equitable preservation budget, which we have advocated be substantially increased by about 50% over what they have allocated. But it's specifically designated to address the kinds of things that John has just outlined. However, the important thing is not only to identify them, but to get them listed. And because in the past, you know, these kinds of buildings have been designated, and then as soon as the owner finds out, they immediately tear them down. So this is, you know, the process and the ownership don't always line up. And just to be aware, but that doesn't affect Eastmoreland in any way, but just for general information.
Any other comments from the panelists on that topic before I move on? No?
Yeah,
Okay.
it was just, I was curious if John was referring to the African American multiple property documentation. Okay.
Yes,
Yeah, that document makes it a lot easier to designate additional properties related to Portland's Black history on the National Register. And this year, we expect 3 additional properties to be designated. So that's exciting. It's certainly not enough. That would make only 6 in total in the city, which is a very small number. But I do think, and you know, I am a historic preservationist by training, so I'm not necessarily, you know, I'm pro-preservation, but I do recognize that there's a lot of, I think historic districts are often targeted as being, you know, the listing of a place like Irvington or Laurelhurst or Eastmoreland, where there may have been covenants in place. I think, you know, that is one part of history that bears acknowledging, but also, you know, if you look at the bigger picture of just the national government and funding of mortgages and insuring mortgages. Like, this was a nationwide problem. It wasn't just about specific historic districts or specific residential districts in Portland. This was a nationwide problem, and it affected probably tons of houses in the city that we don't know about, that aren't part of a collection in a neighborhood that a neighborhood is trying to protect. So I just, it's not as simple as a covenant in a deed. It's way beyond that. And we just have to, if we're going to recognize the history, I think we have to talk about the whole history and where this falls into place.
Yeah, and just to add to that, those covenants, even if they extended, which they didn't in Eastmoreland, but even if they extended, they were all terminated, I believe, in 1947. Kirk can confirm that. But so they've been out of, they haven't even been an issue in any way for well over 50 years, 70 years. And as Hillary points out, the so-called redlining was really a financial redlining. It was not a zoning redlining. And, there's, and certainly in Eastmoreland and in the inner southeast neighborhoods.
Okay, any other comments, questions on that? We'll move on. Subject of green spaces has come up. Here we had a question which I thought was interesting. Someone asked, why is Dunaway School and the Eastmoreland Golf Course included in this historic district? And I might add to that also, Berkeley Park and Crystal Springs are also included in the district. Rod, you were instrumental in putting this together. Can you answer that for us?
Well, along with Kirk, yes, these, particularly the golf course and golf course in particular, was integral to the whole concept of Eastmoreland, along with Reed College. So those elements were all part of the original concept for Eastmoreland. And the Crystal Springs wasn't adopted formally as a garden until the 50s. But again, it was part of the golf course property and part of the overall development plan. And so integral to the neighborhood and integral to preservation. And we are especially, there have been a number of initiatives at the political level saying that our golf courses should be redeveloped into high density housing. And this is one of the reasons why we are particularly anxious to get the historic designation in place to protect these green spaces, which are the lungs of the city, as part of the historic district.
Kirk, would you like to elaborate too, since you were so involved in this as well?
Sure. I think just to kind of build upon what Rod had said, I think there was the golf course was certainly integral to the development of the neighborhood. Golf was an exceptionally popular game across a lot of different socioeconomic groups during that time period. And it was really meant to be a draw to the folks who were living in Eastmoreland. In addition to that, there was some, because the period of significance extended to the 1950s, it seemed like the Crystal Springs Park fell into that period of significance because there were still things being built in Eastmoreland during that time period. And in addition to that, yes, the neighborhood was also built where it was, and it was designed the way it was, especially with the Reed Avenue, Reed's the Parkway. Yeah, thank you. It was meant to be in this kind of axial alignment with the college, and so all the different historical components kind of fit together within the boundaries of the district.
Okay, well, that's very good. Let's see, we've got some more specific questions here too. This is about someone's not sure their house was designated properly as historic or non-historic. Is the nomination document there the final say, or is there avenues of appeal if you think it was miscategorized in that nominating document?
Oh, I can speak to that and Robert can follow up. So National Register nominations can be amended even after they're passed, and there's a process by which to go through that. If folks want to us to examine that, so as part of the nomination process, this is a nomination that's gone past a 2-year period from original return by the National Park Service. So it's subject to what's called an examination process under the state rule that was adopted in June of last year. So we're looking at the documentation, and if someone would like to contact Robert to talk about that, we would look at it. The nomination document does discuss, I believe, in section 7, and I'm reaching way back into the memory banks here, Kirk, so you might need to fill in, but it does discuss the measuring stick of what was called contributing and non-contributing. And I did see in the chat there was a discussion of what was contributing and non-contributing. So a contributing property is a historic property that resembles or keeps the majority of its historic features during the important historic period identified in the document, which is up in the form. A non-contributing property is something that doesn't retain the majority of its historic characteristics or was built outside that time period. And I'm going to go ahead and let Robert speak to anything more about the process of contacting him, and then maybe Kirk wants to kind of fill in on the comment on contributing, non-contributing, and how the document addresses that. So Robert?
Yeah, if there's any questions on your property, whether it's a question about the contributing or non-contributing designation outlined in the nomination, or if changes have happened since maybe that nomination was written and you'd like to update that information, you're very welcome to do so. Yeah, I can put, I don't know if the chat's available or how that might work. I can always put, okay, it doesn't work. So
But we can post your information on our website.
okay, and we have all of this is available on our website. So if the easiest way to get there is OregonHeritage.org, and that will link you there, and then you can click on the National Register page. And we have all of our contact information there, but just get in touch with us and we can walk you through that process.
Okay, that's good to know. I'm looking over the Q&A here. And again, audience members, thank you for watching and for contributing these questions. We are looking for specific questions about how this would impact you. And I'm trying to find specific questions about how it will or will not change your life. Some people have asked about the specific boundaries of the proposed district. And I did neglect to talk about that. You know, we all know Eastmoreland as a whole, but there's a big chunk of Eastmoreland that is exempt from the historic district. It's the so-called Berkeley edition. And this is, you know, where Berkeley Park is. It's the area south of that, but east of 36th. So draw a line right down 36 pretty much from Berkeley Park, and everything to the east side of that is not part of the historic district. And I believe that was because there was so much rebuilding on that in that area in the 60s and 70s. There just wasn't that core group of historically significant houses to justify it. Even within Eastmoreland itself, only 80%, I think it's 81% of the houses are contributing resources, and about 20% are not. So about 1 out of every 5 houses would not be affected by the historic district in any way, only those contributing properties. I think I want to move on now, and I want to tell people that I really respect all these questions. I'm going to go through the website, and on that Oregon, on our page, which you link to this from, we'll try to answer as many of these as we possibly can that we just don't have time to get to here. Rod, you're raising your hand?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify one thing, which has been the Berkeley edition begins at properties, the back of properties facing 36. So it's not the center line of 36. It's
Okay.
properties on the other side, just so you know. And you know, there are some significant properties in that Berkeley edition, but as David has said, there were so many that weren't, that you know, so many that have been remodeled that it wasn't included. And that is the area of our neighborhood that's actually had the most redevelopment. And those new houses are, you know, many of them they're nice houses, but they've also taken away some of our more affordable houses. So that's all I wanted to add.
Okay. Let's go to this next step here where we are in the process, because people are asking, well, if I support it, I don't support it, what happens next? And maybe Ian could start off with a little history. Like last month, you announced a big step about resubmitting it. Maybe you could just kind of bring us up to speed on that.
Okay, so this particular nomination was submitted by the Eastmoreland Neighborhood Association. Under the state rules, once a nomination is submitted, it basically remains in process, and our obligation as a state office is to continue processing that nomination until it's withdrawn by the proponent or the National Park Service makes a final decision. Those are the two end points there. There's a little bit of a caveat. Should it get returned to our office, we have some discretion on our next steps there. On this particular nomination, there's been a delay because we had to do a major revision to the state rules. There was an inconsistency between state and federal rules. Got us balled up on that. We resolved that. We had another, we had to address another change in the rules, the federal rules, about whether someone has to have their statement notarized or not. It came out of the National Park Service in November of last year. Objections no longer need to be notarized, that Park Service decision, so we were delayed on that. So we are going forward now with a rule that reflects current standards for the National Park Service, and we are processing it. It's important to point out the National Park Service does get to make the final decision. And so our responsibility is to come up with that property owner list and tally those statements and forward it to them so that they can close that process. And so where we are right now is Robert is, I have 2 full-time staff members assigned to the project for the next 3 weeks, as well as 3 temporary employees. We just got our last temporary employee today. There's due to staffing shortages, and we took a little moment to staff up. They're going to spend the next 3 weeks counting and validating the statements that we previously received. Property owners where we can't match with current property records will receive inquiries on that, and we will go ahead and follow through. We are looking at a timeline of resubmission in sometime in June at this point. We're going to be able to come down with a little bit more finality on time based on once we kind of get some work rolling. And I'm going to have Robert talk a little bit more because he's working very directly with on this type of project. Once we send it to the National Park Service, it's in their hands and they get the opportunity to kind of determine what they'd like to do. They have up to 45 days to consider it. It's at their discretion what that time frame looks like. It's also that 45-day start is based on when they receive it, and they'll be impacted by the 4th of July holiday when they can log it in, get the notice out. And so we won't know when that 45th day is until they run their process and inform us of when it is. We're going to request that they do the 45-day full period. In the past, they indicated that's indeed what they would do. But I'm going to point out to everyone, I am not the boss of the federal government. So I will make the request and remind them of what they said to us before, because we think it's important that they do that full 45-day period. So we were our expectation, our hope I should say, would be to have a decision back on this. If we can get it in June, be mid-August. That's assuming that we can go ahead and go forward as planned. So Robert, do you want to kind of fill in any details I might have missed, specifics people might be interested in?
I guess the only thing I might add here is if there are specific questions about your property or potentially about how to submit a statement or to just understand the larger record of what has previously been submitted or anything of that, we just ask that you contact us directly. We'll handle those on case-by-case basis, and we're very happy to work with you. In the next couple of weeks, there will be letters going out to individuals if we have questions about what we've received. as we begin to go through the new revised rule and the procedures to recount this and resubmit this nomination. So if you have questions, just please contact us. And again, our contact information is on our website at oregonheritage.org.
That's great. And just to clarify, so you need a majority of the residents of Eastmoreland to object if this is going to fail. And if a majority do not object, we assume it will become part of the National Historic District Registry. Let me ask another question. So you can file an objection to it, but I understand that if you're new here and say you just moved in last year, you can also determine if the previous owner of your house filed an objection, and you might feel differently than that previous owner, and you can, in essence, rescind that previous objection. Is that correct?
So yes, you can rescind that, so any property owner can object any property, and that's owners are defined in the rules. So any property owner can object. They can rescind the objection of a prior property owner, or they can assert that they own real property. So in the case that there's a subdivision of a lot and they want to be registered as both an owner and that lot is there, they can certainly do that. And they can do any combination of those particular actions. The same form is used for all of that. And so, I mean, the big thing that I would encourage everyone to be doing, reminding their neighbors to do, is to go to our website, check that ownership list. And if you have any questions, contact us. Our interest is making sure that whatever people's wish is, that it's accurately reflected, their ownership and whatever their desire is. So if it's to have an objection filed with us, that they do that. If it's to rescind a previous objection or just make sure that there's not one for that owner, that they take care of that as well. So if folks could just go to our website, and Robert's given that address, and check that, and contact our office with any questions, we'll be happy to help you. Robert, do you have anything else to add that I may have missed?
Do you want to give us your phone number slowly so that those listening can pick it up?
So yeah, two ways to contact. You could either email us or by phone. So the best phone number to call about this would be 503-986-0690. And we'll get that question sorted. And then the email address would be orshpo.nationalregisterprogram@oprd.oregon.gov. So either phone call or email, and we will get back to you.
I would note those are general email boxes that we can allow, that allows us to sort and distribute among staff, so that we can get faster responses out to people than if it were to go to a single individual staff member. We don't have access to each other's email or phone account. So generalized questions going to those general accounts will get responded to faster because of that.
Thank you so much. And the process is a little confusing to Oregonians, voting by mail and just checking and sending stuff in. And this is a little different, everyone, but it's all designed to get to a fair result. But I think we'll still have some confusion. For example, just got a question here. I just moved to the neighborhood and I want to show my support for the district. What do I do? And that's a valid question because it's not apparent. Do you need to do anything?
So for, there's a public comment period which remains open. If someone would like to and any public comment we receive, we would pass on to the National Park Service. The process of property owners having to object, that is in the federal rule for the federal program, and so our program just reflects that. That's not something, we discuss it in our state rule, but it is a federal rule. The federal rule is not concerned with support. It's concerned with objections, is the way it's written. And it is specifically stated, it's like the district is listed unless the majority of property owners object. If someone would like to submit a letter on any other topic or issue, please do so. We're talking mostly about the objections statements here, or rescissions, or other kinds of things, which makes sense. But to let everyone know, this is a general comment period. Your comments are invited. go ahead and send them in. They will be packaged up and sent to the National Park Service with the other information. To be clear, Park Service has a digital submission requirement now, so we keep the originals in our office, but they get the digital package of that. But it will all go forward. So if there's concerns about content of the nomination, process, other kinds of things, that is all part of the public comment period, and that will all be accepted and forwarded.
And the comments are separate from an actual objection or rescission of an objection.
Yeah, if you want to submit comments, you can put it in the same envelope, but please don't write it on the back of your form. You know, and we will take it handwritten, we will take it typed out, whatever you choose to do. But for your statement document, please fill that out according to the instructions. And if you have an additional comment, you can provide that any way you like. But do keep those two separate for our process. So that we're able to count accurately.
Okay. And here's another.
So David,
Go ahead, Rod.
Just before you go ahead, maybe if Robert could send to David the list of phone numbers and addresses and email addresses that you want us to use that we can put on our website. Right now, I think we have Ian's address listed on our website as the primary person to contact. So we can add that additional information if you'll send that to David.
Yeah, we'll post that on our website. And there is, judging by our comments, there's a lot of interest in this topic. Someone just asked this guy, a fellow named Vic, says, when ownership changes of a house, that the prior objection is automatically rescinded and that they don't need to do anything. But is that the case if you just bought here last year? Does the prior, if there were a prior objection, is that wiped away automatically?
Robert, could you go ahead and speak to that process, please?
Sure. So in looking at the way that the rule is set up, part of that process is that we are re-looking at everything that we have previously received and comparing it to current records at this time. And so as part of that, what we are looking for is to see in terms of the Multnomah County assessor records, which we are provided and the rule directs us towards to use to start with of who's an owner. We are looking at that and comparing what we have to that list. If something causes us to ask for more clarification, we will be sending out a letter to a previous submission that we have. So expect that if that is something that is there, just so that we can make sure that we have our records correct. As the rule directs us, we are looking to make sure that we have records related to people that are owners, defined as owners in the rule within that district participating in this process. So that is how we are handling that. That is something that we are working on at the moment. It's a lengthy process, but we will get through that.
What would be your...
I'm not sure you've answered the question. The question was, if a owner had previously objected and they sold the house, does that objection carry over?
So this is a case-by-case sort of basis here. I'm happy to speak directly to an owner if they have a question about their property. They're more than welcome to contact us, and we can walk them through that and take a look in our records. But we'd really have to kind of see, depending on that case.
I would add that the rule explicitly directs us to assume that the property tax records are correct. So unless we see a discrepancy, Robert's saying is if we see a discrepancy, we're going to follow up. But there will be an underlying assumption that the records are correct, which goes back to my recommendation to every single property owner: check that list, make sure it's correct, and take proactive action. So and the thing is our hesitancy to get in hypotheticals is there is a lot of nuance in this rule and for the individual ownership situations. And so we are authorized under the rule, under the examination process, to go ahead and add and remove owners or properties or whatnot as is necessary to true up the list based on what we're seeing in those tax records once we contact property owners. So, again, my strong recommendation for property owners is to look at that list. If you have any questions, contact Robert, so we can make sure that list is accurate. It is our interest to make sure that every single property owner, their ownership is properly represented, that every single property owner is their opinion, whether they want to object or support the nomination, whatever it is accurately reflected. And that is our job. So, and that is best accomplished by folks going ahead and looking at that list and contacting us with any questions so we can do our job.
And where is that list?
It's on our
You've
website.
you've mentioned it several times. Robert, if you could add that to the list of things you're sending to David, that would be helpful.
Just real fast, is that list going to be updated basically through June?
So that's a great question, Kirk. So the list that we have up is what we have for current Multnomah County records for reference for property owners. It is a tool. In the past, what we've done is we've put up kind of a rolling list of kind of where we're at. And as you well know, the number of owners changes as folks assert ownership or decline ownership. And so we've just been talking, property ownership is dynamic. So a property may have had multiple owners at one point, and then it sold, and now it has a different number of owners. We will be publishing a single list, the property owner list, with all of the documents and a single count when we send it off to the National Park Service. We have found in the past that producing rolling documents, especially since those totals count as property owners assert their opinion and their rights changes, that it's not very helpful to be producing rolling documents. Those documents are public records. Folks can request them through the public process, but we will not issue a count until it is stamped and sent off to the National Park Service, because we have to provide the Park Service with a property owner list and a total tally and a determination of whether there is or is not owner consent. We'll work with the National Park Service to find out how they want us to continue that process through the 45-day consideration period, because property owners may continue to turn in statements throughout that period. Up to this point, Park Service hasn't been willing to discuss hypotheticals. The answer Robert and I have received is, when we get it, we'll tell you what we want. So, so we're just going to submit it to them, but we will, they have informed us, and we accept the responsibility of continuing that counting process through that 45-day period. So when they make their final determination, they have those final numbers. So that's a long answer to what seemed like a short question. Do you have a follow-up for that for me, Kirk, or did I get at it?
You got it.
Okay.
And I think to summarize that answer, it's if you're a new owner, check that list that's on your website to make sure your name is listed properly.
And we will be proactively reaching out to any property owner where we see discrepancies as well. So I know today it's the political season, but please, if you receive an envelope with a state parks logo on it, don't recycle it. Remind your neighbors to not recycle it. This is the time of year where we're getting a lot of junk mail. So please, please do not do that.
And I will remind people too, you've made it a little bit easier. There's no notarization of forms that was required in the past for filing objection. It doesn't have to be notarized. Or rescinding an objection. It doesn't have to be notarized. They just send that into you.
So let me clarify that. That's not a ruling from the state of Oregon. That was a direction from the National Park Service that we responded to. Absolutely correct. There is no requirement for a notary. If you look at the form and you roll it over and read the instructions, it's clear on that. We chose to leave the notary form on notary opportunity on there, so that there would be perhaps fewer questions, or people could exercise the options that they thought were appropriate, depending on how they've arranged their ownership. But all you need to do is sign the statement that says, starts with under penalty of perjury, in which case that is valid. So if you have any questions about what that means, you can chat with Robert. You can also follow up with whoever gives you your legal advice as well.
Rod, did you raise your hand there? Did you have a question?
No, I was emphasizing under perjury, under the, that instead of the notary, they
Right.
inserted that stronger language.
Okay. Cool. Okay, that was heavy. That was some heavy lifting we all did there. I want to get on to another subject because a great question came in here, totally unrelated to that topic, but I think it's a breath of fresh air, especially when I walk around the neighborhood this time of year. It's the question from an anonymous person is, much of the character of Eastmoreland is the reliance on landscape elements such as street trees and hedges between properties. Are these important character defining features protected by the HD designation? And I think that's a very good question because, the trees, the landscaping do make this neighborhood very unique. Anyone would like to address that?
I guess I
Well,
could take a stab at
yeah,
that.
Hillary, you can address that. Yes.
Okay. Street trees, no. So the historic district the historic district regulations apply to private property, not to street trees. Heritage trees have their own rules that aren't regulated by chapters 33,445 and 846 in the zoning code. And I'm not a tree expert, so I'm not going to go there. But generally, because this would be a national registered district, the only things that are applicable is demolition review and whether or not something meets that. And most of those thresholds refer to a building or a structure, and landscaping, shrubs, trees don't fall into that category.
Yeah, so I totally agree with that. But to answer the question or a little bit more in depth. So the city's street tree regulations do require the maintenance of street trees, and the Eastmoreland Tree Committee has established recommended standards and has incentives, financial incentives, for maintaining the pattern of street trees that we have. And especially that's true on Reed College Place, where the tree standards are maintained by the neighborhood, but owned by PBOT. That's the city's transportation department.
And just to add one more thing, in the nomination itself, we do discuss kind of the street network, as well as kind of the overall landscaping plan. There was some very deliberate intention behind the way it was designed, and it is included in the nomination. It's just in terms of how those rules are implemented by the city, they're not necessarily protected by design review or even by demolition review. So,
yeah, but they were very much a part of the nomination itself.
correct. Yep.
Okay. There's another question came up. I thought it was very interesting, a little different one, but it was about a lot splitting and rebuilding if you have a contributing property in a historic district. And I think this might go to a larger issue, is what might Eastmoreland look like if we do not have a historic district? This is person asking, I've got my neighbor might have a 75 by 100 foot lot or 100 by 100 foot lot. If that's not protected by an historic district, how can that property be sliced and diced and rebuilt?
I can take a stab at that. So right now, the city's allowing 4 and 6 plexes on every lot that's larger than 4,500 square feet. So if somebody takes that lot, they could divide it, and they could put a 6-plex on it and probably a skinny house and a duplex in addition on the second part of the lot. So the state law is now allowing duplexes on every buildable lot. And the city's new standards, which they're trying to adopt now, are allowing those lots to be divided up into as many parcels as the density allows. So if there are 4 to 6 units, you can divide the property up into that number of parcels. And the city's also removing any minimum lot sizes. So there's no longer a minimum standard for lot size. So, and in addition to that, for those who are concerned, there are no off-street parking requirements. So you can easily do the math and see the implications of a corner with, let's say, 16 units on it and 30 cars, how that's going to add up. So that's certainly something to give some thought to when you're thinking about whether you're supporting the demolition protections and the historic district.
Any other comments from our panelists? John, maybe some experience from Laurelhurst in that?
You know, let me think about this. Before we established the historic district, there was a really nice, beautiful old house on the large corner lot, double lot, that was demolished and the double lot split and 2 of these, McMansion things built. Since then, I don't think there's been any lot splitting, in part because, Laurelhurst lots tend to be rather smaller than Eastmoreland lots. Most of ours are kind of the standard 5,000 square foot lot. Yeah. My understanding, though, is that, and Hillary, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, the historic district alone doesn't make any difference to one's ability to split the lot or not. It only perhaps matters if that splitting involves demolishing a contributing house, like it sits on the lot line or something. But absent that, I don't think historic district makes any difference to splitting ability. Am I sort of right?
Yeah, the current rules, you can't drop a new lot line in the middle of an existing structure. And so if there was an existing house like in the middle, you couldn't drop that new lot line in the middle of a house. And so John responded to this question, if that house had to be demolished in order to drop that lot line, that's when National Register Historic District regulations would kick in terms of doing a demolition review. I can't speak to anything that's potentially in RIP 2. I just don't know that code that well, the proposed code.
Okay, well, we have about 5 minutes left here before we need to terminate our Zoom session. And I think I just want to thank everyone again for coming up. And Ian, would you like to say some final words?
Yeah, I'd like to, I think I want to make sure, because I've been watching the questions, make sure it's really clear for everyone. If they want to submit a statement, specifically I see questions about objections, that form is available on our website. Robert will be providing that information. And so what you would do is you would grab that form, you download it, it's got instructions on the back, fill it out. If you have any questions whatsoever, contact Robert again through his contact information. We will walk you through that form. There is an option to notarize. That is not required. What's required is that you sign it. And again, the instructions will be very explicit on that. Include any documentation that you need. While we will be reaching out to people if there's discrepancies, it's not necessary to sit on your hands. If you see a problem, reach out to us right away. We want to resolve these as quickly as possible. So, get that form, get it filled out, send it to us. We will respond back with a letter that basically says, by your submission, we understand the following, and this is how we've handled it. If there's additional questions, we're going to follow up with you. So let's say you forgot to sign the form. We'll say, you didn't sign the form. We need a signed form from you. So we will follow up there. But the answer, how do you object? We've got a courtesy form up. Go ahead and pull that down, get it signing back to our office. Same process if you'd like to rescind. Same process if you'd like to assert ownership over a new parcel piece of property. If this all sounds like Greek and you're thoroughly confused, please contact Robert. We will talk to you about your individual situation. We will walk you through. You can tell us what you're trying to do, and we will walk you through how to do it.
Well, That's very great. And we'll post that information on our website, and you've already given out your website. So thanks for extending that handout.
And just to just another note, we might at the end of this recorded session have a additional slide essentially that has all that information, David, so that when somebody's watching this, they don't have to go any further than stay till the end, and all that information will be here.
I'm not sure.
Okay, we'll see.
But we'll have it on our website. And Eastmoreland Neighborhood Association is also sponsoring an event on Sunday, May 15th, where we'll have these forms available and people can come talk and ask questions. And perhaps we can help you look up your individual property as well. And that's also on the website, the eastmorelandpdx.org/history, which was the link on the postcard and everything else. Kind of a catch-all. We'll put this information up there. Any other last minute thoughts before we have to sign off here? Okay, I want to thank everyone who wrote in questions. I know I didn't get to every single one, but I want to go through these and post them on the Eastmoreland website so we can try to give specific answers to every single question that was up there. This is a change for the neighborhood. It's been controversial. It's been going on many, many years, but we hope this helped everyone get the actual facts about what will and will not happen if Eastmoreland becomes part of the National Register for Historic Districts. Thanks again, and if I see no further comments, we'll sign off, and we'll also post a link where you can watch this on our website if you couldn't make it through the entire thing or had to be called away. Again, thanks to all your panelists. This was some great information.
And thank you for participating, guys. Much appreciated.
Pleasure.